Lustpodden riktar sig till alla som är intresserade av lust och relationer i terapi. Podden leds av religionshistorikern och teologen Leif Karlsson och Hanna Möllås som är legitimerad barnmorska, legitimerad psykoterapeut och sexolog med flera auktorisationer i sexologi. Dagens lustpodd är en fortsättning från förra veckans intervjuer som jag gjorde när jag var i Tartu på den sexologiska konferensen. Den hette Sexuality, Pain and or Pleasure. Den estniska sexologiska föreningen är väldigt liten men lyckades genomföra en fin konferens med ett väldigt gediget schema. Många föreläsare som beskrev sexualiteten från perspektiv av både njutning men också utifrån smärtsamt sex. De hade till och med bryggt öl som de kallade för pain och sen fanns det ett annat öl som hette pleasure. I dagens avsnitt så ska ni få lyssna på en intervju som jag har gjort med Paul Korrovits som var konferenschef. Han jobbar annars som doktor och androlog. Och hans kollega i teamet som hade hand om konferensen, Annika Tamme, som är både forskare, psykolog och sexterapeut. Och eftersom jag inte kan estländska så är ju intervjun på engelska. So here I am now with Annika and Paul. Welcome.
Hello.
Hello.
So maybe you should just introduce yourself. Who are you? Who would like to start?
I can go first. So I am Annika Tamme. Hello. I am a PhD student at the University of Tartu. I'm also a junior lecturer here. So I do teach psychology students as well. And when I'm not at the university, I am also working as a sex therapist here in Tartu, in Estonia. So kind of trying to navigate both the academic world and client work as well, because I think for me, they really kind of merge very well together. So to make sure that the work that I do with clients is science-based, but also to not get lost in the science and the big words and not be in touch with people's actual lives. So I really make sure that I'm kind of one foot in each world.
Oh, that's so great. And Paul, what about you? Who are you?
I'm a clinical andrologist, so it means I work in the field of men's reproductive health, although andrology has become more wide field in terms of also including the general health of men, because it's also related to the specific andrologic conditions and diseases that you can't really dismiss it, and because andrology is a very, very young specialty in medicine, I can see it evolving like under my own eyes. So what was andrology like 20 years ago when I started, it was very specifically male specific diseases like hormonal or genetic or fertility related or something like that. But now it's much wider. So mainly we just work with the issues that patients have, the symptoms or complaints that patients have, but in almost 80-90% of cases, we arrive at the general health issues, because that is the reason behind all that, the lifestyle, the habits, all these small details. And I have been working in andrology for, I think it's 20 years. So, and during that time, I also did my PhD in microbiology, and I have been doing youth counseling for young men. also since 2002 or 3. I don't remember anymore. So it's been a long and interesting time.
Oh, that's so interesting, and all of your knowledge, and I mean both being in the medical science and all the science, and as a specialist in clinical sexology, it's also interesting to hear about how is it to work with sexology in Estonia. You're smiling, Annika.
Oh, you can go first.
Well, it's also quite a young specialty in Estonia, and actually it's a young specialty everywhere. So it's also evolving, and it's there are different sides of the coin, because it's the specialists, how they work in their specific fields, because there are very few people who can actually tell that they are only sexologists and nothing else. It's usually based on some other specialty. So they are, for example, they are primarily gynecologists, or they are urologists, or they are something else. But well, you cannot study sexology in the university in Estonia like in a bachelor's degree, right? So so it's only you can only like specialize in that field later, when you have already graduated with your initial degree. But to work from another side, it's also all these stereotypes that people have when you talk about sexuality and sex-related issues. And it's not only the generation of people over 50, right? So it's also with younger people, because they are heavily under the influence of the internet. And when you go to Google that whether coffee does kill you, you can find that page that tells you that coffee does kill you. And if you want to find a page that tells you that coffee saves you from a lot of cancers, then you can find that page too. So it really depends on what you are looking for, but there's no filter in between. And that's the problem, that it creates a lot of stereotypes, because they are very easy to believe, and especially young people tend to be very receptive towards these stereotypes. So this is the other side of the coin. So
how do you feel about working with sexology, Annika, in Estonia?
I think it's very interesting to also see the almost like different perspectives between me and Paul, because Paul is more working with like medicine, and since he's an MD, then it's quite interesting to also see the psychological side. So as Paul mentioned, we don't really have education in Estonia that you could access. Even, for example, for psychologists and therapists, we don't right now have curriculums to specialize on sex therapy or clinical sexology. So people do need to go to, well, the closest place is Finland. Of course, if you're like me and you don't speak Finnish, then, for example, I went to the UK to study.
Yeah.
So you kind of have to go somewhere to specialize, and then you can come back. And right now for me, I think I've been in Estonia for, I think it's going to be 3 years. And it's been for me a very interesting journey of trying to navigate the healthcare system here, and finding my place as a clinical sexologist, or someone that has specialized in working with sexual themes. So I'm one of the lucky few that gets to mainly work with sexual themes, both in university and with clients. So it's definitely been very interesting navigating that, because there are so few sex therapists in Estonia, and I think it's not fully a part of the healthcare system yet. But as mentioned multiple times before, I think it is a field that is so rapidly growing, and there's so much new knowledge, and I think it's very exciting to almost be there as it is growing as a science, and also the system in Estonia as well, and the teamwork between different sides of kind of sexology.
So what are the main issues that people come to seek you about?
I think in many cases, well, actually the reason why men come to see me as a doctor or a counselor, it's the reason that's why they booked a meeting or booked a visit, but later actually it turns out that the initial problem is maybe the smallest or one of the smallest of this man's concerns. So after we discover all the other like layers beneath this initial problem, but of course the main reasons, the main actual reasons why they come to visit a counselor in younger men, it's actually a lack of knowledge, it's fear, insecurity, low self-esteem, and fear of making mistakes, fear of changing something, and maybe also some getting stuck into some vicious circle that they can't get out, be it a circle of habits or a circle of these typical trains of thought that are of no good use actually. So carrying some maybe stereotypes about women and trying to make relationships based on that. So it usually doesn't help, you know, especially if you are a young man like 22 years old and you think that women should do this or that, and why don't they do that, you know? But the problem is not in the women, of course. So the problem is that you don't know them, and also of course they know quite a little about themselves, how their body works, what is a disease and what is not a disease. So being a doctor, I would say that recognizing a disease is much simpler than to recognize a case where it's actually a variation of the norm. Variation of the normal, because variations of the normal go way beyond just these textbook cases, and diseases actually have very specific signs. They may not all be there at the same moment, but they are recognizable and they are progressive in time. So the more the disease progresses, the more it shows itself, and at the end, even a second year medical student will recognize it, you know. But with the variation of the normal, you may go around with that like your whole life, and nobody gets you a correct diagnosis because there is none. So this is quite a challenge sometimes, and also to communicate it to a patient that you have no disease, because some patients they want to have a disease because they want to have a diagnosis, something to hold upon and hold on to, and to get treatment, because if we know what's wrong, then we can treat some. There's a lot of crazy stuff done in the medical series and TV shows and so on. So the expectations are quite high. But to communicate what is normal is actually it's I could say it's more than half of my work.
Oh wow! Yeah. So, do you agree with this, Annika? What are the things that you meet in your line of work, both in your profession as at the university, but also as a psychologist?
Yeah, well, I suppose since I did specialize quite early on, I do kind of identify more with being a sexologist than I do with being a psychologist, but I do work with the psychological themes, and I very much agree with the fact that the labels or the problems that people initially come in to my room with some of the times aren't actually diagnoses as such anyway, and I don't diagnose, but I can also see the problems, and quite often they are variations of normal. And I wholeheartedly agree with that. But I suppose I'm then that person that also sits and learns with them, you know, communication skills, body skills, pleasure, the meaning of everything, and how to navigate what it means to be a sexual person, if they are a sexual person, because sometimes they might discover that, you know, their big problem is the fact that the society is shouting at them to be sexual. Well, they're not. So I suppose I get to do the very fun and colorful work where nobody is alike, and no matter what kind of label they come in with, I get to really dive deep into what it is and what it means for them, and to be on that like self-discovery and exploration journey with them, which I'm incredibly grateful to do.
And it's so interesting to hear you talk, because it's so mind-blowing that it's the same issues all over the world. I mean, it's not far from you're not far from Sweden, but it's the same issues. It's fears, and it's variations of norms, and you know, to be a sexual person is something that is so connected with the general health, that you say. So it's interesting that it's the same questions that we have also.
Absolutely.
So what does your colleagues think in Estonia when you say that you talk about that you work with sexology? Do they like it, or are they interested, or is it a hard thing to talk about?
I suppose people around me that are not in kind of the professional realms, I would say, are very aware, because I've kind of been telling everyone that I will become a sexologist for quite a long time before I actually got to study it. And I think in terms of the people around me professionally, I think people are really craving the knowledge and really craving to talk about sexual themes. And I think when I work at my clinic, it's very much about the medics, so kind of the midwives and the doctors and the gynecologists. They're really craving the psychological aspects and the psychological dynamics that go on, because I don't think that they feel they've gotten enough of that knowledge and training. And I think it's the flip side of that with being around psychologists, because obviously if you work as a psychologist, you can't just eliminate sex and sexuality from life. But I think that it's also a feeling for psychologists quite often that they don't know enough about bodily functioning and what is normal. And I think a lot of psychologists then also haven't ever faced their own like moral stances with sex, because you know when you're in sexology training, you're very much faced with your own views on sexuality and normal, and you learn to navigate all of that. And I think that's what everyone is kind of craving still, or at least that's what I see. And I think it's been, I've really enjoyed having these conversations, because for example, whenever I talk to like the doctors in our clinic, then I always learn something new, because I'm not a doctor. I obviously don't know their world. And I think with talking to psychologists, it's always so kind of interesting to see the different ways that sexuality just is so much like every other part of our life, but we've kind of made a distinction there somewhere. Even though, you know, if you're an anxious person, then probably that anxiety is going to translate beautifully into your sex life. If you're in general quite an insecure person, that's probably going to translate into your sexual life, and vice versa. So it's I really love getting into these conversations, because you really get to look at sexology from a different angle that you don't perhaps every day. Even though I work with psychological themes, and it's obviously not that far from me, you still get another perspective. And I think that's very fruitful for both of us in that conversation. Yeah.
Very interesting. So, Paul, what does your colleague say about your sexology perspectives?
I think if I think about my colleagues in andrology, and there are like 5 or 6 guys there, they are all very well. They have to do the same work as me, so they cannot be ignorant, and they also have to learn the same ropes. But when it's about other specialties, it's a bit tricky, because when you go to surgical specialties, it's mostly men's world, and because boys like medical students, they usually go and study surgery in the residency years. So most surgeons are men, at least I think in Estonia. I think it's almost the same everywhere. So and in that, it's there's a bit like this macho culture in surgery, because they think they do the most important work in medicine, because other fields of medicine is just this it's like these soft topics, and it's not so. Go see a therapist, and go if you have some issue with a psychological issue, or things they don't understand, they say go see a shrink. So they never try to solve these problems, or they just throw a stereotype at you, like worry less or think positively or something like that, like pop psychology. So so it very much depends on who you talk to, but usually people who see patients with these problems in their everyday work. I mean, gynecologists and of course andrologists and a lot of endocrinologists and neurologists as well. They are usually way more cautious about giving. They actually hold sexologists in quite high esteem, because they know it's a very specific work that requires very special knowledge, and there are very few people who actually can do that in Estonia. To find a good therapist in Estonia, you have to know someone who knows them. So there's that's another problem, that we don't have a good comprehensive website that you can go and see that oh, here are all the contacts, and just write them or call them. And as has been with sexology also in the Nordic countries, that there are people or medical specialists who just they put up a sign on their cabinet that I'm a sexologist, and that's it. No one can say that you are not. That's a problem, because there are some you could say like specialists who may make your things worse. But of course there are some of my colleagues in medicine, I mean not in andrology, but who think that what we do in our clinic is we just write prescriptions of Viagra from morning to nightfall. So so this is the perception of what andrologist does. So so usually it's quite a limited vision. But those who have like more contacts, or they have had some patients that we have had to discuss between us, they usually are more respectful towards these topics.
So this has been so good talking to you. I really hope that maybe I can talk to you again, and especially also Annika, to talk about your research.
Absolutely.
So thank you both of you for joining me, and I certainly hope that this was a good recording. And
Yes.
And I know that there are so many Swedish sexologists that attended the conference, and everyone was so pleased and so happy, and they can't praise you enough for doing this conference about sexuality and pain and pleasure. It was very, very good. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Bye.
I'm so glad you guys had a good time.
Ja, jag hoppas att ni har fått med er lite mer om hur sexologin faktiskt inte bara frodas i Sverige utan i andra länder. Och det är ju spännande, precis som Annika beskriver, att de är i ett skeende där sexologin håller på att utarbetas och blir mer och mer normaliserad som en del i ett ämne som är viktigt för både patienter och inom akademin. Jag kommer ju säkert få möjlighet att prata mer med Annika. Hon forskar kring sexualitet och fantasier och liknande. Så det kommer vara spännande att få höra mer om det längre fram. Och Annika har även gått en utbildning som jag själv ska gå som heter Compulsive Sexual Behaviors. Och det ska bli jättespännande och det känns lite kul att jag har någon som redan har gått den här utbildningen som jag kan lära mig av. För dig som går och funderar på om du vill bli sexolog och hur man går tillväga om man skulle vilja bli det, så har vi i nästa veckas avsnitt en särskild gäst som kan en del om det här. Så lyssna då på avsnittet om hur blir jag sexolog. Ha det så gott. Hej hej! Du har lyssnat till Lustpodden. För mer information och tips från programmet så hänvisar vi till lustpodden.se. Där kan du också kontakta oss om du vill vara med och berätta din berättelse om lust och relationer i terapi. Signaturmelodin är skapad av Johan Nilsson och redaktör och producent och ansvarig för klippning är Julia Linde.